If you like learning about the obscure history of the NFL on Jaguar Gator 9, then you're really going to like what's taking place on the all-new channel Jaguar Gator 8, where we talk all things college football. Click the card in the upper right corner to subscribe to that channel. And now, on with our feature presentation. This one's going to hurt to make. Fred Taylor is one of my all-time favorite players, and he is a Jaguars legend in every sense of the word. He might be not just the most underrated running back in the history of the NFL, but the most underrated player in the history of the NFL. The fact that he only made one Pro Bowl, and only made it because he was an alternate, is a travesty. No one has worn the number 28 jersey since he left the team, and I doubt that anyone's going to be wearing that jersey for a long time, if ever. And now that Tony Boselli is officially in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, with a Jaguar finally getting into canon in a long overdue move, I will pound the drum for Fred Taylor to be in the Hall of Fame, because his numbers match up. And if he had the exact same numbers in a bigger market, he would be in the Hall. No doubt about it. But man, this was just stupid. Like, really stupid. If you've been a long-time viewer of my channel, you know that the number one rule of trash talking is the fact that you better be able to back it up. And if you're gonna trash talk, it's probably not a good idea to say that one of the best defenses in the NFL is, in fact, not very good and doesn't have any talent. Because at the end of the 2000 season, Jacksonville Jaguars running back Fred Taylor, for some inexplicable reason, decided to pick a fight against the New York Giants defense. And let's just say that it backfired in spectacular fashion. This is the story behind what might be the stupidest trash talk in the over quarter-century-long history of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Before I talk about the incident in question, we need some context to understand the team that the Jaguars are going up against, how good they were, and what made these comments all the more ridiculous. In 2000, the NFC was an ultra-competitive conference, as entering the final week of the season, there were 5 teams within one game of each other for the best record in the conference. However, there was one team that seemed to be the cream of the crop in that conference, and that was the team in East Rutherford by the name of the New York Giants. Through 16 weeks, the Giants were 11-4, and were red hot, having won their last 4 games. And while there were a lot of reasons why the Giants were near the top, from a great season offensively from the likes of Tiki Barber and Amani Toomer, to some great coaching on the part of Jim Fossil, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, perhaps no reason was bigger than the play of their defense. During their 4-game winning streak entering the final week where they looked like the hottest team in football, the Giants allowed just 37 points. And over the course of the 15-game season, the Giants allowed just 221 points, for an average of just over 14 points per game. This was the best defense in the NFC from a points allowed standpoint, and was the 4th best defense in the NFL. I'll give you one guess as to which defense finished number 1 in the league in that department. However, outside of the Baltimore Ravens, because you could make the legitimate argument that the Ravens have the greatest defense in the history of the sport, there was no better run defense in football than the New York Giants. Because every time a halfback got the ball, you had a bunch of blue uniforms swarming to the football and making the stop. The Giants finished the season with 3.2 yards per carry allowed, which was the 3rd best average in the league. They allowed just 1,156 rushing yards all season, which was the 2nd best total in the league. And they allowed just 7 rushing touchdowns, which was the 2nd best total in the league as well. In just about every major statistical category, right behind the Ravens, you saw the Giants and their dominant run defense atop the league. And there were some unbelievable performances in that stretch. Jamal Anderson was 2 years removed from an 1,800-yard season, and in 2000, finished the year with over 1,000 yards. Against the Giants, he had 12 carries for 12 yards. If you're doing the math at home, that's just 1 yard per carry. When the Giants played the Browns, the leading rusher for Cleveland on the day was Travis Prentice. He had 11 carries for 15 yards. Washington running back Stephen Davis led the NFL in 1999 with 17 touchdowns and 100.4 rushing yards per game. And in 2000, made the Pro Bowl again with 1,318 yards and 11 touchdowns on 4 yards per carry. Against the Giants, he had 12 carries for 29 yards and no touchdowns, being completely held in check. Now the Giants had one running back left to close out the regular season, knowing that if they stopped him and won this game, they would be the number 1 seed in the NFC and would have home field advantage throughout the playoffs. And the running back in question, that was Jacksonville Jaguars running back Fred Taylor. In 2000, the Jacksonville Jaguars were a pretty disappointing team. After making the playoffs in 4 consecutive seasons, winning the AFC Central in each of the past 2 years, and finishing the 1999 season with the best record in football, and going undefeated against every team not named the Tennessee Titans, the Jaguars enter the new millennium as one of the favorites to make it to the Super Bowl. However, the Jags were highly disappointing. They had a 5-game losing streak to essentially end their season before Halloween, and entering the final week of the season, they were 7-8 and eliminated from the playoff picture. Fortunately for Jags fans, this was the last time that a Tom Coughlin-led Jaguars team had a disappointing and underachieving season coming off of an appearance in the AFC Championship. However, if there was one player that was a bright spot in this bad season, it was this man right here. This is Fred Taylor, and in 2000, you can make a legitimate argument that he was the best running back in the AFC, and one of the best running backs in football. Now, Taylor got off to a slow start, as he was inactive for the first 3 games of the season, and from games 4 through 6, he had just 135 yards rushing on less than 3 yards per carry. But over the next 9 games, good luck finding any running back hotter than Taylor, because from game 7 through game 15, Taylor had 1,212 rushing yards and over 5.2 yards per carry and 10 rushing touchdowns, plus an additional 2 receiving touchdowns for good measure. This meant that he was averaging just under 135 rushing yards per game in this 9-game stretch, and had over 100 yards rushing in every single game. To put into perspective how great he was, if you took this 9-game stretch and extrapolated it to a full 16-game season, you would get a man who finished the season with 2,155 rushing yards, which would have been the all-time record, and 17 rushing touchdowns. Again, the fact that Taylor did not make the Pro Bowl this season, even though he led the league in rushing yards per game, is crazy. And there were some incredible performances that Taylor had in that 9-game stretch. The Jaguars finally got over the hump against the Titans in Week 13 with a 16-13 victory, and Taylor scored the only touchdown of the game for the Jags. In Jacksonville's dominant 44-10 victory over the Arizona Cardinals in their home finale, Taylor scored 2 touchdowns in the first half. And most notably, in one of the most iconic individual performances in Jags history, and in what has to be the greatest game of his storied career, he went into Three Rivers Stadium to take on the Pittsburgh Steelers, and in a 34-24 victory, Taylor had 234 rushing yards on 7.8 yards per carry and 3 rushing touchdowns. Now he was going to close out the season against the New York Giants. And he had a message for that stout Giants defense. Yeah, you guys are not very good. Before I go any further, there were some really solid players on that Giants front 7. You had linebacker Jesse Armstead, who had been an anchor on New York's defense for years, started all 16 games for the team, and made it to the Pro Bowl for the 4th straight year. You had defensive tackle Keith Hamilton, who finished the season with 10 sacks, was named a second-team All-Pro, and finished 4th in the voting for Defensive Player of the Year. Outside of Leroy Glover on the New Orleans Saints and Warren Sapp on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Hamilton was the best defensive tackle in football that year. And of course, you had defensive end Michael Strahan, who finished the season with 9.5 sacks, started every game, and was coming off of 3 straight Pro Bowl appearances. The Giants had some really good players on that defense, as is to be expected when you have a front 7 that boasts the best run defense in the league outside of the Baltimore Ravens. But according to Fred Taylor, the Giants had no talent. He took the time during a conference call before the game to absolutely destroy the Giants, with one writer saying that by the end of the call, the New York area reporters were stunned and were given a gift-wrapped story. Taylor talked about the difference between the Giants defense and the Ravens and the Titans defenses, since they were the 2 best defenses in football from a points allowed standpoint. And Taylor said that those defenses had more speed, saying, Tennessee and Baltimore have more talent on defense. They're way quicker. A lot quicker. He trashed the Giants secondary, saying they have 4 safeties back there instead of 2 cornerbacks and 2 safeties. He talked about the fact that the Giants blitz a lot because they don't have good athletes. And when talking about John Fox's defensive scheme, he said, even if you don't have the talent, your scheme can make some players better than they are. Then Taylor, continuing to put his foot in his mouth, elaborated on that statement, saying that if they were not blitzing because of their bad athletes, they were blitzing because John Fox was too predictable. As Taylor said, even if athleticism is not the case, it might be the scheme that explains it. Their defensive coach? That might be all he knows how to do. It could be one way or the other. And he issued a warning to the Giants about these blitzes, saying they had better be careful with those blitzes, because with wide receivers Jimmy Smith and Caden McCardle out there, if they don't get to the quarterback, there will be big plays all over the field. This is an incredibly bold strategy, especially when Eddie George was the only runner to run for 100 yards on the Giants all season, to say that the Giants do not have a talented defense, and that their predictable scheme makes them way better than they are on paper. You can imagine that when the Giants heard these comments, they were downright stunned. When the Giants were alerted to these comments, just about everyone had the same reaction. Even though head coach Jim Fossil told the players to not engage in a spinning contest with Taylor, players were furious and shocked by these comments, and some of them felt the need to make their voices heard and clap back. Defensive tackle Keith Hamilton, maybe the best player on that defense, said, "He's not going to rush for 100 yards by shooting his mouth off. This game is a lot bigger to me than Fred Taylor and his comments. It's crucial for us to get that number 1 seed in the NFC. Whatever he says, he has to come here and do it. I couldn't care less about Fred Taylor and what he thinks about our talent level. He's the last thing on my mind. You think I care about his comments about how good he thinks we are? If being number 1 in the NFC doesn't speak for itself, then we'll just have to see what happens." Safety Sam Garnes said, "It would be senseless for me to say anything back. Just look on paper and see what's going on." Offensive tackle Lomas Brown said, "We have a prideful defense. We have a lot of warriors over there, and they're going to be anxious to prove a point." Safety Sean Williams said, "I didn't even know we blitzed that much. I'm not worried whether he respects me or not. I don't know why he said it. I guess he looked at the films and said what he felt." And both Brown and Williams wanted to play this game to prove Taylor and the critics wrong. Brown said, "We know there's still a perception about us, whether we're a real contender or not. There is still a lot of doubters, but we know the only way to shut up the critics is to keep winning." And Williams said, "If we don't shut him down, you guys will be saying that Fred Taylor was right." As for what Fossil said on if he had any reaction to Taylor's comments, he said that he didn't have a comment, not wanting to give the Jaguars any bulletin board material. However, he stood up for his players, saying, "Our defense is well coached and our players play hard. And we have talent, outstanding talent, and I wouldn't trade any of our guys. I wouldn't trade them for anyone." With all of that out of the way, we head to Giants Stadium. It is a nationally televised Saturday game to close out the season, and the Giants had everything to play for. Not only were they playing for home field, but they were playing to prove Fred Taylor wrong, and to silence all the critics that said that they weren't very talented. That raises the ultimate question: who had the last laugh? Guessing by the title of this video, the result probably won't surprise you. To close out the regular season, the Giants ended up prevailing in this interconference matchup, winning it by a final score of 28-25. Even though the Jaguars led at 10-7 after 3 quarters, New York scored 21 points in the final quarter, including an onside kick return. This game gave the Giants the number 1 seed, and gave them a ton of momentum going into the playoffs, as they entered on a 5-game winning streak. And the Giants wound up going to Super Bowl 35, making it to their 3rd Super Bowl in franchise history thanks to this home field advantage. Additionally, the result meant that the Jaguars, 1 year after going 14-2, finished the season with a below 500 record for the first time since 1995, when they were an expansion team. But how did Fred Taylor do? Well, he struggled pretty heavily. Turns out, the Giants' run defense was pretty good. Who would have thought? Yes, he had this incredible 44-yard touchdown run in the second quarter, but outside of this run, he did absolutely nothing. Taylor finished the game with 13 carries for 52 yards, leaving the game in the third quarter with a bruised thigh. This means that if you take out that 44-yard run, he had 12 carries for 8 yards. Take out the touchdown run, and he averaged less than 1 yard per carry, making it the first time since Week 6 against the Ravens that he didn't finish the game with 100-plus rushing yards. It was also his 2nd worst rushing output of the season, with the only one worse being his 24-yard performance in Week 5 against the Steelers. Taylor said that he didn't regret those comments, but some Giants players took time in the post-game press conference to destroy him, with Keith Hamilton saying he was shooting his mouth off. But the game's not won in the papers. You've got to come out there and run the ball. And when you start popping heads like we did, you don't need to do a whole lot of talking. And defensive end Cedric Jones said, "I'd be anxious to see what his opinion is now. He called us out, and we had to respond." Again, as I've said before, the number 1 rule of trash talking is that you better be able to back it up. And it's probably not the best idea to pick a fight against the 2nd best run defense in football by telling them that they weren't very good and very talented. Fred Taylor is an incredible player, and he might be the greatest Jacksonville Jaguar of all time when you consider how long he played for the team and what he meant to the city. But this was not his finest moment, because on the weekend before Christmas in 2000, Taylor gave the Giants the greatest Christmas gift of them all, and that was prime bulletin board material. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes, link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9. If you want to see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.